Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mark Taylor will now give a talk entitled Sir Harry Smith and East London. Mr. Mark Taylor, over to you.
There were two notable circumstances that moved Sir Henry Pottinger, the governor of the Cape Colony, in 1847, amid the alarms and the excursions of the War of the Axe, to establish a permanent base at the Buffalo River mouth for the landing of troops and commissariat stores. These circumstances were, firstly, the near disaster which had accompanied a recent experimental landing at Waterloo Bay near the Fish River mouth, and secondly, the fairly favourable report of a Lieutenant Forsyth, who had been instructed to conduct a survey of Buffalo River mouth for the purpose. A report, incidentally, reinforced by the fact that the bark Frederick Huth had successfully and expeditiously discharged a much-needed cargo there at the very time that Forsyth was conducting his survey. Pottinger decided to move the eastern boundary of the Cape Colony from the Fish River to the Buffalo River, when he was succeeded in December 1847 by Sir Harry Smith, whose plans for a frontier settlement were far more comprehensive and at one with frontier opinion. During the short existence of Durban's province of Queen Adelaide, from 1836 to 1837, Smith had been the governor's right-hand man in the settlement and administration of the province. He had known that it was Sir Benjamin Durban's intention to settle a European community between the Buffalo River mouth and the Nahoon. He had been fully conversant with Bailey's experimental landing of the Neisner's cargo in 1836. As a matter of fact, Colonel Harry Smith, as he then was in the neighbourhood of Buffalo mouth at that very time. With 600 troops, his job was that of clearing the natives out of that very area lying between the Buffalo mouth and the Nahoon. It is quite possible that he was at Buffalo mouth at the very time when the Neisner arrived. So the idea of establishing a permanent military port and commissariat depot at Buffalo mouth was by no means a child of impulse when he came to establish them. Smith's frontier settlement of 1848 was in all essentials an implementation of the Durban settlement of 1836, subverted by Lord Glenelg not long afterwards. The fact that the 1848 settlement proved a failure should really make us South Africans review our sentimental acceptance of Durban's frontier settlement of 1836 to 37 as some kind of a panacea which would have established the golden age of frontier history. Perhaps it was as well for Durban's reputation that his new order was not called upon to withstand the test of time. But that is by the way. Sir Harry Smith, in his 1848 settlement, proclaimed the Keiskamma River the new eastern boundary, and annexed all the land of the tribes under arms from the Keiskamma to the Kai rivers, from the Indian Ocean to as far north as present-day Aliwal North, naming the area British Kaffraria. It was his intention to settle the tribes in carefully demarcated areas with military settlements established among them at strategic points. Chiefs were to exercise magisterial jurisdiction over their subjects and were themselves, in turn, to obey all instructions of the Chief Commissioner, namely Colonel Mackinnon, whose headquarters were established at King Williamstown. As in the case of Queen Adelaide, colonial law was not to apply in British Kaffraria, but martial law, or what Professor Eric Walker calls Smith law. Ladies and gentlemen, it's very difficult not to digress at various points when dealing with this lovable, flamboyant character, Sir Harry Smith. You'll excuse me, therefore, if I linger a moment over Sir Harry Smith's very quaint ideas regarding the salutary and potent quality of Smith law. Thus, in his autobiography, he bemoans the premature retrocession of the Queen Adelaide province to the tribes in 1837 on the score that, thanks to his sensible legislation, belief in witchcraft was rapidly dying out among the tribes in Queen Adelaide. It was on the 24th December that the Chief Commissioner, Mackinnon, was ordered to establish permanent military posts at King Williamstown, Fort Waterloo, Fort Cox, Fort White, and one near the mouth of the Buffalo, to be designated Fort Glamorgan, together with a large commissariat store. At the same time, Lieutenant Forsyth was instructed to make another survey of the roadstead and river entrance. Forsyth reported in due course that he thought very highly of the anchorage off the river mouth, having seen several vessels ride out the heaviest gales with apparent ease. In January 1848, after a brief visit to Buffalo Mouth, Sir Harry Smith set out north on the journey made notable by his failure to dissuade Andries Pretorius and his party from shaking the dust of Natal from their feet, and his subsequent proclamation of the Queen's sovereignty over the present-day Orange Free State. It was from his camp 50 miles north of Shiloh Mission that Smith issued his proclamation dated the 14th January 1848, naming the foundations of Fort Glamorgan already laid, together with a 2-mile rayon, the Port of London, and as such, a detached port of Cape Colony. This move, making it a detached port of Cape Colony, in other words, a part of Cape Colony itself, was considered very necessary on account of the swarm of speculators clamoring for freehold land, ostensibly for the purpose of exploiting the potentially lucrative native trade, but actually, in many cases, in order to land goods duty-free at Buffalo Mouth and smuggle them thence into the colony. Smith went even further in his determination to checkmate these gentry. The strictest instructions were issued to the Chief Commissioner to give every encouragement to traders who had fled during hostilities to return and set up stores adjacent to mission stations and military forts. But additional trading licenses, either at East London or anywhere else in Kaffraria, were to be issued with the utmost discretion. So hucksters vociferously demanding land in freehold at Buffalo Mouth in 1848 demanded in vain, while a board of commissioners consisting of Lieutenant Forsyth, de la Barre Blaine, and Charles Borrowdale, with Captain Walpole as president, was instructed by the governor to draw up a list of suggested improvements at East London and the best methods of carrying them out. After the territory had been divided into counties and named after the various counties in England, and the different tribes had been allocated to each, traders were allowed to settle in various parts of Caffraria on payment of a license of £50 per annum. Thus, by the end of 1848, there were 8 licensed traders at Buffalo Mouth, and there was even 1 hotel. Part of the revenue was to be used for the making of roads and other public works, and customs revenue was allocated in part for harbour improvement in the river mouth. From the beginning, the Chief Commissioner, Colonel Mackinnon, not without reason, regarded East London's earliest citizens with considerable misgiving, and warned the governor that the appointment of a civilian magistrate was becoming most desirable for the maintenance of law and order. Smuggling and drunkenness among both civilians and the military appear to have been the root trouble, although by no means the whole of it. For overshadowing all was the chill penury, not only of the population, but more particularly of the government. As late as 1852, the year East London bade Sir Harry Smith a sad farewell, the Civil Commissioner lodged his official complaint with the Cape Town Colonial Secretary that the hut allocated to him as his office, the Civil Commissioner's office, had fallen into such a bad state of repair that it would be cheaper to build a new one at a cost of £6, and an annual grant of a few shillings would serve adequately for keeping his office in repair. The following year, East London became possessed of a magistrate's office, which cost £110, 19 shillings and 1 penny. When about this time the Harbour Commission recommended the construction of a jetty at a cost of £1,500, no doubt knowing the condition of Caffrarian finances, indicated as an alternative plan a jetty that could be constructed by military labour for only £35. Evidently, even this was considered wild extravagance, for both recommendations were turned down. The jail and police force were in keeping with this shabby makeshift state of affairs. The Wattle and Daub prison was so ruinous and insecure that prisoners had to be chained together at night to prevent mass escapes. The 2 constables responsible for maintaining law and order in the town were very seldom sober. When Mackinnon was authorized to appoint 2 suitable townsmen, additional policemen, he replied with a non-possumus, "For I verily believe," he added, "that there is not a tradesman from the most respectable downwards that does not carry on illicit dealings." And as for the East London drink problem, the magistrate lugubriously reported in 1852 that in cases of drunkenness brought to court, what nerve those 2 policemen must have possessed, those with money were fined, and those who could not pay were let off because of lack of accommodation in the prison. In an attempt, no doubt, to increase the revenue, the cost of landing cargo was fixed in 1848 at £2 per ton, a sum which raised the question that, after all, the land journey from Port Elizabeth might be cheaper, and more especially since ships were liable to be kept at the anchorage at the mercy of wind and wave for months on end before they could receive attention. But in spite of all, East London slowly embedded her roots in firmer and more durable soil. Thus, in June 1848, those demanding a stronger title to the land on which they had erected buildings upon leave granted by the officer commanding at the port, they were partially placated, at any rate, by the first sale of public land for residential purposes at Buffalo Mouth. By 1849, it appears from a notice of a sale of plots that Strand Street, Smith Street, and Toby Street were in existence on the West Bank. Toby Street, obviously named after the captain of the Frederick Hooth. The Grahamstown Journal stated that the sale of Crown lands at East London on the 9th of June, 1849, surpassed public expectation, prices ranging from the upset price of £3 to £12 per lot. Thus, by 1850, disreputable infant East London, conceived and begotten in war, and possessing practically no advantage besides her strategic situation, had been granted 2.5 years of blighting penury, alleviated by profound peace in which to rear herself. Perhaps the healthiest signs of growth in that fateful year were the most satisfactory Wesleyan Missionary Conference held at East London in May 1850, followed by Bishop Gray's visit in July of the same year. These events bore fruit in the institution of regular divine worship in a largish storehouse which occupied the open site adjacent to Peterson's Hotel on the West Bank. And a few years later, in the erection of a Methodist school chapel and St. Peter's Anglican Church on the West Bank. But as the year 1850 ran out, East London was called upon to justify her existence in the furnace of war. Warned of the ominous symptoms of unrest among the tribes, Sir Harry Smith in Cape Town regarded these reports as exaggerated. But he was fortunately induced by his council, nevertheless, to proceed to the frontier. He arrived at East London on HMS Hermes on the 17th October. He was very warmly welcomed by the populace, who, in welcoming him, advised him of a memorial which they intended presenting to him in the near future, a memorial of requests. But Sir Harry Smith didn't wait for that. He departed for King Williamstown the same day. His next visit was on the 5th December, when he arrived a second time aboard the Hermes with 4 companies of the 73rd Regiment. On Christmas Day, 1850, he was at Fort Cox when war burst out in Caffraria with the suddenness of a bombshell. 3 military villages which he had established along the Tume were wiped out. Mackinnon and his force of some 600 men were ambushed in the Boomer Pass and thereafter beleaguered at Fort White. Sir Harry Smith was closely besieged at Fort Cox. During the month of January, East London was kept busy by the constant arrival of troops and stores by sea. Within 3 weeks, 1,260 men were safely landed with guns and stores. In short, the port was playing its part magnificently as the base of military operations. Thanks largely to Smith's skillful handling of Parto, who had been the arch enemy in the War of the Axe. This chief, through whose tribal land communication with King Williamstown lay, voluntarily proffered the services of his 1,400 armed tribesmen to guard the lines of communication, an offer gladly accepted and punctiliously discharged. Parto was the one and only Caffrarian chief to stand by the governor in this desperate hour. It's no exaggeration to claim that with the Commander-in-Chief isolated in Fort Cox, his deputy Mackinnon similarly invested in Fort White, and confusion overall, the fate of Caffraria and of the whole Eastern Cape Colony depended entirely upon whether East London could meet all the demands this desperate situation imposed upon her. We know she admirably fulfilled her vital role, in no small measure due to the heroism, no less, and the exemplary devotion to duty of the port captain, George Walker, whose defiance of wind and wave kept up an uninterrupted flow of troops and military stores, and thus made possible the build-up of force to contain, first of all, and finally to subdue the Caffrarian tribes. George Walker's achievement can be comprehended the better by noting that for his life-saving exploits alone during the 1850-53 war, he would, in the more recent world conflict, deservedly have been awarded the George Cross with several bars. Instead of receiving due recognition, however, he was permitted to retire prematurely, his health permanently impaired by the strain of those war years. Upon his death, shortly after retirement, the niggardly Cape government rejected all demands that the disability pension of $250 a year should be awarded to his widow. That request was turned down. On the 9th April, 1852, Sir Harry Smith, manfully concealing a broken heart, handed over command at King Williamstown to Sir George Cathcart. On the 11th April, at 3 a.m., he and his staff attempted to steal out of King Williamstown unnoticed on horseback for East London, but in vain. All the inhabitants of King Williamstown and all the troops, they turned out voluntarily in spite of the early hour. A vast concourse escorted him to Fort Murray, where he was met by a body of natives headed by the faithful Chief Patu, and he was greeted for the very last time with the Xhosa salutation, Nkosi Nkulu. What memories, what pain that roar must have conjured up for Sir Harry Smith. Incorrigibly chivalrous to the last, Sir Harry dismissed his comrades in arms with the words, "Gentlemen, take care of the soldiers, and God bless you." And he proceeded thence from Fort Murray, escorted by the friendly natives only. Others on horse and foot joined the concourse, a strange and romantic spectacle indeed. At East London, he had for perhaps the first time the leisure to look at the growing township which he himself had planted 4 years previously. Bishop Gray, who had visited East London a month or two before, has left us the following description of the port at this time. East London, situated at the mouth of the Buffalo River, is but a very small place and has few natural advantages as any place I have ever seen claiming to be a port. I could have walked across the river without getting wet above the knee. There is no shelter whatsoever for vessels, it being an open roadstead. The shore is rugged, and the surf, though there was no wind during my stay, was very heavy. The sole remaining point is that the anchorage is said to be very good. What had Sir Harry Smith achieved in founding East London? He had established a seaport of immense strategic value for the defense of the eastern frontier. But it was also at the same time really the only feasible port along the whole length of the coastline from Algoa Bay to Durban. Without a doubt, Smith, in founding East London, had looked beyond his immediate pressing need for a military port to maintain his frontier defense system. He must have foreseen at the time when his Port of London would serve as entrepot for the large European population he intended settling in the Caffrarian hinterland, and in addition, for his scattered family of Boer children, as he liked to call them, throughout the Orange River sovereignty and beyond, and for the lucrative native trade throughout Caffraria and the Transkeian territories. Would he have named Buffalo Mouth Port of London had he not envisaged such promising commercial possibilities? The question answers itself. His founding of East London, therefore, was an imaginative and a statesmanlike act. It was no fault of his that military strategy should have compelled the siting of Fort Glamorgan and its satellite village upon the West Bank. Nor can he be blamed for the fact that the 1850-53 Frontier War, by practically ending the era of frontier wars, thus virtually robbed Fort Glamorgan and infant East London of their raison d'etre before the baby had learned to crawl. If he had had insufficient money to promote the development of East London, neither had his successors, Sir George Cathcart and Sir George Grey. The fact that East London, as late as 1878, could actually show less in material achievement after 3 decades of existence than Sir Harry Smith's East London had achieved in 5 brief years of war and peace. That fact is the fault of the Cape government. It was the Cape government which pleaded inability and refused to exploit East London's commercial advantages from 1852 until the 70s, until after sheep farming had become established in the hinterland, until after the native trade had developed and proved itself profitable, and only after the discovery of precious metals in the interior. Only then did it provide the essential foundation for East London's commercial future in the form of harbour development and railway construction. And in so doing, it revealed for all to see that Sir Harry Smith's anachronistic frontier port of East London was cut off from practically every advantage the new age had to offer by being on the wrong side of the river. Indeed and indeed, Sir Harry Smith served South Africa with all the courage and ability vouchsafed any born soldier of genius, and nowhere did he serve her to better purpose than here in East London. Okay.
On behalf of everyone here, thank you for a most interesting and instructive talk. You know, very little has been written on East London, but what has been written has been usually copied from book to book, and the unfortunate thing is that all the inaccuracies get copied as well. But listening to you, it's pretty obvious that you've derived your information from primary sources, and it's an example which we all here could well copy. It's been wonderfully refreshing to have such an original talk. And on behalf of us all, I would like to congratulate you on this most absorbing and interesting lecture, and to say that it has been an inspiring and pleasurable evening. Thank you.